And I would like to welcome everyone to Living Objects application of Photogrammetry in immersive and remote learning with Michael Sider, Susie Lavallee, Sharon Hu, Michael Wang, and Michael Sukanik. And I will turn it over to our guests.
Thanks, Barbara. And that was actually Andrew Wang and Mike Suchanik. Thanks for joining us. Before we start, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that we're joining from all over the place across the country and possibly further afield. So I encourage everyone to take a moment to consider the first people of the lands that you're on. And at our end, all the presenters today are staff and faculty from University of British Columbia. And so I want to acknowledge that UBC is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And for myself, I'm in Burnaby, BC, and that's the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Hunkaminam and Squamish people. So I'd encourage, if you don't know who the first people are on the land that you're on, it's a good thing to look into. I encourage you to do that. So I will begin by introducing myself and everyone else. My name is Michael Sider. I'm a producer working at UBC Studios, and was involved in the prototypes around the project that we're going to talk about today and have been supporting along the way since, and pretty excited to share what we've discovered. With me today is Susie Lavallee, who's a professor of teaching at UBC Faculty of Forestry, and Sharon Hu is a project coordinator working at UBC Studios on this project in particular. And they'll be sharing most of the content today. And then we also have Mike Suchanek and Andrew Wang, who are on the technical end supporting the project. So if you have questions that we don't have quick answers to, Mike and Andrew likely will. So they're here to support in that way today. And throughout the presentation, if you have questions, please feel free to write them into the chat, and we'll keep an eye on those. And if we can respond right away, we will, and we'll have a time to go through questions that haven't been answered later on in the session. So feel free to write questions in the chat along the way. First thing I wanted to check in with everyone about to get a sense of who's in the room and what experience you have. We're wondering if you would just write in the chat what your experience is with 3D models, if you're familiar with 3D models or not familiar with 3D models, and also what your interest is in particular, whether you're interested in learning applications of 3D models, or you're interested in the technical how to produce the 3D models, or both. And that'd be great to just give us a sense of where you're coming from and what your experience is. And just to confirm what we mean by 3D models, I'll just share one that we've produced just to confirm. Sorry with the gap here for a moment as I switch screen share. And this is one that we produced as a prototype with, I'll describe later how we produced it, but basically what we mean by a 3D model is something that you're able to interact with. You can turn it around, you can look at different angles, you can zoom in and out. And so it's an interactive 3D model is what we're talking about. So if you could just, thanks Carol for your comment there. Just let us know again what your experience is and what your particular interest is today. That would be great. And I will just come back to the presentation now. Zoom is great, but the transitions get clunky. Thanks, Marie. So, so far, Carol is saying not much experience, but interested in learning applications. Marie is not much experience as well, interested in the process of creating them. Great, so we'll be covering both of those today. And we'll be able to follow up with any of your questions in both areas as we go. So I'll just give a quick, Stephen is familiar with the concept and interested in the use. That's great to know. So I'll give a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, Susie is going to talk about why you would use 3D models, what the opportunities are, what challenges it matches. Then Sharon will start talking about how to find existing 3D models that you might want to use, and I'll talk briefly about how we've created them and what the different options are that way. Then Sharon will talk about how to deploy, how to share 3D models, particularly in a learning context. And then Sharon and Susie will both talk about some lessons that we've learned during this project, things that hopefully we can make things easier for anyone else exploring these questions. And then we'll also talk about some of the things that we're experimenting with and some future hopes and looking forward. So I will now hand the presentation to Susie, who will talk about why you would want to use 3D models.
Thanks very much, Michael. At the beginning of this project back in 2020, it actually began much before that, we quickly pivoted to producing virtual objects instead of doing 3D printing, which was the original focus that we had in mind for year one of the project. And so the image that you see in front of you is a 3D printed humerus bone from a human skull, or human skeleton. It's on the left, and the actual one is on the right. And so this was an original test case that was done as we were embarking on the project and figuring out what could be created for our learning environments at UBC. This piece of the project was done at UBC Medicine's The Hive, and we're deeply grateful to them for their collaboration over the years. However, of course, the pandemic caused us to do a very quick turn towards virtual objects. And as we return to our classrooms this fall, there's some really strong reasons to keep creating and to keep using virtual objects. And today I want to tell you 6 reasons why we should keep creating, making, using virtual objects in our classrooms. Next slide. So in lecture-based courses, a really popular pedagogical approach is the flipped classroom, which provides materials and activities to the students ahead of time. And this has a big advantage of providing more experienced learners with a quick refresher before the class, but it also allows academic English language learners the chance to practice their vocabulary, and it gives time in the classroom environment for more higher level learning objectives, other than just pointing at a piece of a skull and knowing its name. And because of the hands-on nature of labs, it's often assumed that it isn't possible to do much flipping of the content. But this is where virtual objects can play a really strong role. The benefits are really similar to that of a flipped classroom, but perhaps even more important for labs, since students can focus more on the hands-on elements of the activities in the lab. And with virtual objects, instructors can reduce what are sometimes quite long pre-lab lectures that orient the students to materials, and have instead the instructors can have the students more active and engaged for a longer period of time during the lab. Next slide. So as universities grow, the issue of the space that's available in our labs is also growing. Building hard infrastructure like teaching labs is really expensive. Before we can be more efficient with our space and time, but we can be more efficient with our space and time by using things like virtual resources. So in the online environment, our students, many students can be looking at one object at the same time. So there aren't the same issues with crowding around that one particular specimen. Also, you can even shorten lab times if the basic materials are provided ahead of time or are just provided online to students so that they can review their materials either before they come to the lab or after they've been in the lab. And they have less time, less time wasted on sort of the smaller aspects of the lab. Next slide. So when students are able to experience an object through interaction and exploration, there's real tangible benefits for post-secondary learners. And one of the things that we're seeing through the literature is that there is an enhanced language learning that's not just of the disciplinary vocabulary, but also for English language learners who are a really, really important part of our university population. Learning objectives that are centered on disciplinary concepts, things like dentition patterns on skulls, these are easier for students to grasp if they've had the chance to have an experience with them, rotating the object or engaging with it in some way. The creation of virtual objects means that we're able to create these high quality remote learning opportunities where none even existed before, which is really exciting. And this is another thing that we're really hoping to expand into after the pandemic. Next slide. So as a part of a public institution, we saw this as an opportunity to add to the public wealth of virtual resources through our grant, which was limited to the scope of UBC resources that were needed and used in UBC courses. So we prioritized within the university for materials that would be of use to larger classes and or several courses across campus. What we started to realize is that these materials that we were creating would be useful to many foundational courses across North America and possibly even globally. For example, the soil monolith collection that has been created by the project, an example is shown here on the slide. This will be used at 13 other universities across Canada to support soil science courses. And they may even have wider applications elsewhere in the world. These monoliths are normally housed at UBC's Land and Food Systems laboratories, and they're very heavy, very large, and very fragile. It's not a great combination for a teaching resource. Using public platforms like Sketchfab also ensures that the resources will be available globally. And so we're really excited that we might be able to use these resources to create courses or to help guide content for our partner institutions as well. And in the light of the current events at Cape Town and the absolutely devastating loss of the Jagger Library archives in the Table Mountain fire yesterday, the protection of our valuable collections at universities cannot be overstated. This is another aspect of teaching labs that I'd like to talk about, but it's highly related to our museum collections as well at universities. The issue of wear and tear on specimens is a huge problem that requires constant mitigation. Virtual items may address the costs of replacing those items in teaching collections, but there's other aspects about virtual objects that we can address. So objects that we provide to our students in the labs are really limited. They're limited to what we can actually replace, which means that lab specimens the students have access to are not as broad as the topic areas the students are actually studying. And so if we have virtual objects, we can use artifacts from places like the British Museum in our archaeology classes. And our animal identification labs might also be able to include things like extinct species where there's specimens that exist. Also, in the field of medicine, there are strong and very serious ethical issues with acquiring objects for teaching purposes. And so this, for disciplines like medicine and dentistry, they rely on human remains for their anatomy labs. And this is very problematic for those programs because it's difficult for them to keep a good collection. Next slide. So in addition to our ability to show students that are items that are rare or inaccessible, virtual objects may actually provide some opportunities that are even better than the real examples. And particularly for large groups or large classes, the demonstration of some concepts may be much easier and more insightful to use, to do using virtual objects. So a great example, and this is where Michael will switch is screen share, so bear with us a second here. A really great example is this animation of an exploding drill bit and mounting for a wood machining class. And here it's coming up in just a second here, I'm sure. There we go. So by using a virtual model of this process, the instructor for our wood machining lab can demonstrate to a class of any size the composite and then the pieces of the machine, as well as the essential features in movement, like the tightening of the washer at the top of this to secure the drill bit. So at any point, the instructor can pause the animation, they can zoom in and on an area of interest, and they can pivot the model around to show different aspects of the orientation of the pieces. This is particularly exciting where you have technology courses that involve a real hands-on element. So we're coming back to the screen share of our slides again here. So bear with us. Even if you're not able to make use of 3D objects, even if you're not able to make 3D objects of use to your programs, there's a wealth of items available on different platforms. So you don't necessarily have to create them. You can actually use this huge repository that's available already. And it's growing really rapidly. So let's explore a little bit about what's out there and the process of creating 3D objects. And for that, I'll hand the microphone over to my colleague, Sharon. And if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to address them. I'll stay on with the presentation for later questions. Over to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Susie. So like Susie says, when it comes to finding 3D resources for teaching purposes, the good news is there's really a lot of free, high quality 3D models you can use right away, free of charge. So if you are planning to create your own 3D models, Michael Sider will cover the creation process in a little bit. But for now, let's look at where and how you can find 3D models to use right away. So one of the most popular websites to publish and to share 3D models is called Sketchfab. And as you can see on the screen, there's a screenshot of where you can put in the search title. And one of the reasons why we like Sketchfab a lot is a lot of the museums and universities share Creative Commons licensed high quality 3D models on Sketchfab. So it's a really good place to start. Next, please. So we thought rather than me describe how great and wonderful, how many resources are available on Sketchfab, let's just spend 5 minutes for each of us to go to sketchfab.com and poke around, see what you find. And I encourage you to try different keywords, try a common name, try a scientific name, and see what different kinds of objects come up. And for those of you who are familiar with sketchfab.com, I invite you to check out the different filter options. See if you can find 3D objects that have sound attached, or 3D objects that belong to a particular category. Okay, so let's set aside 5 minutes for all of us to individually explore what's on Sketchfab. And according to my clock, it is 10:20. So let's come back at 10:25. And all of us will be checking the chat box. So if you do have any questions, feel free to type it in there. So have fun on Sketchfab for 5 minutes. So Stephen had a good question. Do you need to have an account? Do you need to log in to look for 3D models? And the answer is no. Michael, could you switch to the previous screen? So I wanted to show there's a search bar at the very top. It's highlighted in yellow. That's where you can put in keywords. So the keywords could be soil, it could be monolith, it could be the scientific term for soil monolith.
Sharon, I think I know what the problem is arising. If I could jump in for a moment.
Sure.
The link that's put in the chat goes to the Wildco search page. So that may be requiring a login. So if we could do a link that's just Sketchfab without that search, that might help.
Sketchfab.com. Thanks for catching that. Can I get a quick thumbs up or a yes in the chat from folks who are able to look things up on Sketchfab? I want to make sure you guys are able to log in, you're able to find things.
Well, yeah, no one needs to log in, but finding things, yes.
Okay, so Michael is okay. Stephen, okay, so yeah, so on the Sketchfab homepage, you will see a big picture of a running shoe, but at the very top, there should be a search bar. And that's where you can put in any search terms. So if you're teaching humanities, you might want to look for ancient Roman ruins or sculptures, really anything you might use in your course. So keywords. Okay, so Stephen is now noticing some of the models have $ attached to them. So if there is a cost, it means a 3D designer uploaded a 3D model. And if you want to reuse, meaning download it, modify it for your own purpose, you do need to pay. But Stephen, if you scroll down, in fact, if any other models without the red $ next to it, means it's absolutely free of charge. So you can use it as in you can embed it in your course, you can share it via a link. So Stephen, if you were to click on anything else, when you scroll down that long list of results,
there are certain categories such as Smithsonian is an interesting keyword to use where there's a lot of free, educationally helpful objects. And Susie has put a link in the chat there for another one.
It's an Egyptian artifact.
Mm-hmm.
The British Museum has an amazing collection online.
And also just to suggest, even if a model requires a price to download and use for other purposes, you can still share the link with anyone and share it in a classroom and look at it together and without paying anything. It's publicly accessible, much like a YouTube video. You can just review it in any context.
I've got a good one for you guys.
So as you guys can see, there's a lot of stuff on Sketchfab. If you found anything interesting, if you found anything you didn't think would be freely available anywhere on the web, put it in the chat box and share with other people and see, so we can see what you found. But for now, I'd like to bring us back to the presentation and just continue on with where else can we find 3D resources. So we already found Sketchfab, lots of stuff there, but there's got to be more. So on our project website, our team is creating a list of websites that have 3D models. 3D models that are suitable to use for educational purposes. And on this page that you see in the presentation slide, we have curated a few Sketchfab channels that have very high quality items. Because just like YouTube, when you go to YouTube and you put in a keyword, you get so many results and you don't really know which ones are from a reputable resource and which ones are just folks who are sharing their work. So On this page, on the resources page, we've curated a few Sketchfab channels from really well-known sources like the British Museum, the Smithsonian Institute, places that will be, or channels that are a good place to start. Next, please. In addition to Sketchfab, we have also listed other websites. Oh, can we go back to the previous slide, please? So in addition to Sketchfab, there are, of course, other 3D resources available. For example, clinicalanatomy.ca. It's a project led by Dr. Claudia Krebs at UBC Medicine. And this website has a lot of 3D models and animations that are free to use. And with that, I will hand it over to Michael Sider from UBC Studios to talk to you about the creation process.
Thanks, Sharon. So I'm going to talk briefly about what we've discovered about producing 3D models. It may be that you need to or prefer to just use existing models and not try to produce your own. That's definitely, we suggest that in a lot of situations. There are often situations though where there are no models of a certain object available because it's so unique, or there's no longer available in the ways that you would want to have it publicly available. So if you have the resources and you have that kind of a need, here's a whirlwind tour of how to produce 3D models. I'm happy to discuss the technology in more depth later. And also we have Andrew and Mike are with us who have a lot of tech expertise beyond mine. So hopefully we can field your tech questions as we have them later. But the two main approaches that are being used to create 3D models are laser scanning and the photogrammetry approach. So laser scanning is essentially a laser with a few sensors that are recording how the laser behaves on the object in order to collect the information. And the photogrammetry approach is hundreds of photos taken of the same object at all different angles and in order to put into software, and the software is able to produce a 3D object out of the photos, which is a pretty interesting advance in technology. The pros and cons, the nutshell is that laser scanning is better for very high precision than photogrammetry, but it's a lot more expensive and less accessible. So the equipment is expensive, and then also operating the processing requires skill and a lot more time in a way that the photogrammetry is less expensive. You can do it with one SLR camera and a tripod. It takes more time, but you can get really wonderful models that way. And the software is very accessible for photogrammetry. We use the software I'll mention in a moment. So that's basically the breakdown. Is laser scanning is far more accurate, but more expensive and less accessible. You can also combine them. People will do laser scans and then put photos on top. If you have the resources to do both, that's great. Photogrammetry advantage, as well as being accessible, is that it gives color and texture that looks more like what it looks like to our eye. So if that's important, then sometimes photogrammetry is a better approach than laser scanning. UBC has been using both methods, and for this project we're talking about today, we've tended toward photogrammetry because of prioritizing having things look like what they look like to our eye, and just the accessibility as well in terms of the equipment and the processing. The laser scanning has been used at UBC Medicine in situations. That's a good example of a situation where the precision is more important than having it look like what it looks like to our eye. So, to give a brief view of each, photogrammetry, basically you take hundreds of photos from all angles. If you need the top and the bottom of the object, then you flip it and take photos of the bottom. We've been using a rotating turntable, as you see here, that's mechanically timed to turn at a certain pace, and then all the cameras are automatically flashing at a certain pace in order to get all the photos very quickly. But you can also do this, as I was saying, with one SLR camera, which is how we produced the bear skull that I showed at the beginning of the session. Again, it takes more time, but it's something that we were able to do without a lot of struggle. This can also be done with a cell phone to take the photos. I'll show you an example of how that looks later. So after you take all the photos, we used reality capture software, which is fairly accessible. It's available on Steam for $44 a month. So you could rent it for a month and try it out and make a few models just during that month even. Pretty easy to use. Basically, we just loaded all the photos. You can see them all on the left there. There's a few hundred photos. And there's some pretty simple automatic settings. You just press go. And on our faster computers, it only took 20 minutes to produce the model that we ended up with. The speed of the processing will depend on your computer, of course. So we have some faster computers, but still very accessible, easy to use, and really amazing results. Laser scanning. Here's Andrew Wang, who is being shown by Ishan of Medicine's The Hive how to use the laser scanner. They were very gracious in helping us test it out to compare between photogrammetry and laser scanning with the bear skull. And so again, it's very expensive equipment. And this is actually at the UBC Medicine facility called The Hive. Stephen, I believe there are other software options. Mike and Andrew, I wonder if you could chime in on chat about other alternative software approaches. That would be helpful. Thank you. So laser scanning, expensive equipment, takes some training to use. And then the processing is pretty labor intensive and technically demanding. So you do a lot of optimization while you're scanning. And then also in post, you can work on that quite a bit as well. So, and it's proprietary software that comes with the scanner. So you're not able to just access the software in the same way. And the scanner that we used here is called the Spider. And I believe it was about $35,000, just to give a sense of the price range on that, compared to an SLR camera, which you could get one for $500 pretty easily. So between these, you get different kinds of results. I'm just going to show the laser scanning version of the bear skull that you saw us scanning there. And this would be on MeshLab. So as you can see, there's a real high degree of accuracy. There's detail in the bone that you don't get with the photogrammetry. But the color looks a little funny, and it's because the laser is getting technically accurate color, but it's getting it how it looks to a laser, where the photogrammetry, you get images that look how it looks to our eye because it's a photo. So again, excellent for high precision, not as great for the visual texture and color. And then as I showed you previously, here's the bear skull that we produced to show the difference. So this is built from photos. So it just looks more natural. It looks like what it looks like to our eye. And the precision is still very high, to the point where I was seeing detail in our scan that I wasn't able to see with my eyes in the original object. So it's still like very high precision. And showing this to, when we were doing this prototype, it was working with Susie and Cole Burton of Forestry. And when I showed them this, I was asking, is this enough precision for your purposes? And it was more than enough for what they were up to. So the photogrammetry gives enough precision while giving the advantage of the color and texture, enough precision for certain kinds of purposes. So it really depends on what you're up to and what you need. Then there's also the version of doing with your cell phone, which I will show you an example. So you see the object on the right, and then through a cell phone, and then the kind of model that you would get as a result on the left. So, you know, it's amazing that you can do this with your phone. It's not very precise currently. It's getting better constantly though. So within a year, I wouldn't be surprised if we could do very high resolution, beautiful scans with your phone. So watch this space. It's developing very quickly, and it's an exciting time to be thinking about 3D models for that reason. So, so yeah, currently, again, the conclusion we came to for most of what we're working on is photogrammetry, taking photos, and SLR was sufficient, and reality capture is the software we went with, but there are higher resolution versions and lower resolution versions, and we'd be happy to chat more about these aspects if you are interested in the technical end of things. So now I will hand it back over to Sharon, who will talk about how to deploy 3D models.
Thanks, Michael. So at this point of the presentation, we have looked at how to find 3D models or how to create your own 3D models. And the next step is to share it. And one of the easiest ways to share 3D models you created is to publish them on a sharing platform like Sketchfab. And once the Sketchfab or once the model is uploaded to Sketchfab, then it can be embedded or shared. Next, please. So as you can see, the highlighted area. So this is an answer to the question from Yamna. So Yamna, you found a 3D model. You want to use it in your course. This is how you can do it. So you can click on either embed and then copy the embed code, paste it in your learning management system or into your course webpage, or you can click on share to share the link to that 3D model you found. Next, please. So if you want to share it via a website, then you can copy that link, go to your webpage, and add the link to the 3D model directly on your page. Next, please. Or you can embed the 3D model on your course page. So the whole sharing and embedding process is very similar to sharing a video. I think it was Michael earlier mentioned, it's like sharing a video, you create it and you upload it to YouTube and then embed that video in your course or share the link to that video either by email or embed the link in your course. Okay, so let's take a couple of minutes to either stretch your legs, refill your coffee, or if any of you have specific questions for Michael about the production side, for Susie about the teaching and learning side, we are here and we will pick up the presentation again, let's say 2 minutes. Yeah. So let's pick it up again at 10:40. Let's move on. Let's continue on to the part where I'm really interested in, which is you have found the 3D model, you've embedded in your course, but how do your students actually interact with the 3D models? Next, please. So what we want to avoid is to just present the 3D models to the students without any instructions. I think all of us, we've experienced this. We have stood in front of a museum exhibit and we're looking at these beautiful objects, but we're not quite sure what we're supposed to do with it. We're not quite sure what we're looking at, which parts we should be paying attention to, and how we're supposed to interact with this exhibit. So this is a feeling for a lot of students. It's similar to the first time they're looking at or trying to interact with a 3D model. They have no idea what to do, and they may not realize the potentials of using the 3D model unless you point it out to them. So a really good way to introduce the 3D models to your student is, first, you use a 3D model in a synchronous session. So either in a webinar or when we go back to face-to-face teaching, you show it during class, projected onto the screen. So the students are looking at your screen as you are interacting with the 3D model. So they know how to spin it, how to zoom in, how to pan. And then you get the students to be involved with how to interact with these 3D models. So you ask them, what do you see? What are the details you can pay attention to on the 3D model? And then the final step is to encourage your students to ask questions about how they can use the 3D models when they are learning the course material or to prepare for an exam. So once they know how to interact with the 3D model, then it will be easier for them to look at the 3D models on their own. Next, please. And for the lessons learned, I will hand it back to Susie.
Thanks, Sharon. It's been really interesting to see the objects that are the most useful to our instructors and their students. And it's funny because in the world of 3D objects, there's a predominance of things like dinosaurs, imaginary creatures, and gaming related things. But for our courses, like the one we have in forest ecology, it seems like things like this pine cone are really valuable learning tools. So embrace the mundane. It's okay. Sometimes the simplest objects are really critical for our students to learn about. Next slide. There's another aspect that you need to consider, and I think this touches on some of the things that Stephen Downs was mentioning in the chat. There's lots of different levels of quality for 3D objects, and Michael Sider mentioned this earlier. It really just depends on the application. Some users may be interested in 3D printing, which requires really high quality models, but other applications might require far less. So for example, in this close-up of the cougar skull, you can see the facets that are created by the lower resolution of the model. But this model is actually more than enough for our students who are studying comparative anatomy, who are looking at things like skull shape, dentition, and much larger features. There's also trade-offs to consider in terms of the production time and the platform uploading time, so Sketchfab, and the maximum size of the uploads to accounts on platforms. Next. So there's sorry, this is Sharon.
Nope, go for it, Susie.
No way, I was on a roll there. Go for it.
Well, as Susie and I work on this project, we found that there are a lot of ways to augment existing 3D models, and augmenting them will really boost the value of the 3D models for the students. One way is to place tags on these 3D models. As you can see on the in the image, there are numbers on the 3D model, and when a student clicks on the number, a text description will pop up, and the student can still continue to rotate the 3D model, click on the next number, or click on the arrow at the bottom of the screen to scroll through the different annotation. Another way to augment a 3D model is to add a high resolution photo or additional information in these pop-up boxes. Another way to augment the 3D models is to add a 360 photo as a background. And this is a fairly straightforward modification you can make without having to do programming or really getting into the technical photogrammetry aspects. So if you have a camera, you use a software to create that 360 photo, and then you can upload it as a background in Sketchfab. And this is very effective for objects where you want to show the environment or the habitat, so give it that contextual information. The photo you're looking at on the left is the original 3D model. So high resolution soil monolith, but no context where that soil sample came from. And on the right is a 360 photo as the background, and the students can see where the soil came from. Next, please. One more lessons learned. This is something we learned the hard way, which is to make the models downloadable whenever possible. And this is for a couple of reasons. First, you want to make your models reused by other people. So making it downloadable means other people can download it, and then they can make further modifications. They can add annotations to it. They can add their own 360 photos to it. The other reason why making it downloadable is important is because not all the students have high-speed internet connection. So if you embed the 3D model in your course and they go to that page, students who are on low-speed internet, they do have to wait a few moments, sometimes a few minutes, for the 3D model to download. So making it downloadable means once they've downloaded onto their computer, they don't need internet access in order to access the 3D model. And another thing about making it downloadable is if you do plan to use a 3D model as part of your assignment or part of your quiz, the students are already stressed enough when they're taking that exam or taking that quiz. The last thing you want them to do is sit there, wait for the 3D model to load before they can answer the question. So if you do want to use 3D model in your quiz or assignment, make sure you make it downloadable. And one last note about Sketchfab is it works very well on mobile, and it does have a free app for mobile users to enhance the viewing experience.
So looking forward, we're entering year 2 of our project, and this amazing team of people is working to push the boundaries of photogrammetry and to look for advanced interactions. So one example is the use of a method called stack focus, which allows for us to get a really high quality image of really small items like this bark beetle. And you can see in the photo on the left just how small it is compared to the camera lens. So combining stack focus with photogrammetry can allow us to create virtual objects of really, really small items. So in this case, we will be able to offer virtual objects that are much better than even the in-lab experiences, which would require a microscope, would offer. And so we can enable students to interact with these items much greater than they would even in the real life experience. So if you want to know more about the process and combining stack focus imagery with 3D models, our incredibly talented team member, Mike Suchanek, is here today, and he can tell you a little bit about this, maybe in the chat or in the questions at the end. Next slide. So before we wrap our talk today, I just want to acknowledge that this amazing team of technical experts and students at UBC have tackled these challenges with gusto. They've created these incredibly valuable 3D objects that have been employed in courses at UBC already. And also, this project was primarily funded by a UBC Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund grant, which is specifically to create resources for courses at UBC. Next slide. And so some final words in our presentation today will be those of our collaborators, reflecting on their experiences in the classroom with 3D objects as a virtual classroom this year. So Cole Burton's students appreciated using models of the skulls on their own and having unlimited time and control over their use. His students were looking at things like skulls. In Sally Aitken's class, her students found that they could see features on the pine cones better than the virtual objects, better than they could in the face-to-face classes, which was really amazing as well. And so with that, I would thank you all very, very much for coming today or for watching this video, because I know some of you will be watching it after the fact. And I invite you guys to ask us questions in the chat, and we've got a few team members who can step in to help as well. So adding 3D objects to H5P in Moodle, who wants to take that one on? Sharon?
I'll take a stab at it. So Yamna, are you thinking of embedding a 3D model you found on Sketchfab into Moodle?
Yeah, thank you. Exactly. Like we embed the video into H5P, and we add like quizzes, we add information. So I was thinking it's going to be great for students to get something like that.
Yeah, it really is. But I wonder, maybe it's better to skip H5P altogether. So if you embed a 3D model you found on Sketchfab directly into Moodle, and then just build an assignment around it. So rather than import it into H5P and then embed H5P into Moodle.
Yeah, but like that, we can't add annotation or anything to the object. It's going to be like what it is in the original website with the embed option.
Yeah, so we didn't want to go too much into detail about how you can add annotations to a 3D model you found on Sketchfab. But there is actually a way. So if you create an account on Sketchfab, it's free. And if you found a 3D model that allows you to download a copy of it, you can essentially download a copy, upload it into your own Sketchfab account, and then add annotations to it.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
No problem.
We've had some questions about creating videos or animations with 3D objects, and the 3D video that we have, that we showed of the exploding drill bit, is an animation of the 3D objects. Not exactly a 3D video, not quite the same thing.
Yeah, and Mike actually just pointed out that there's also volumetric video, which is essentially 3D video where you can move around and look at the video as it plays back from a headset, or I guess also on the screen, which is not too different from the animation that was created with the drill bit. So there's a lot of different kinds of gradations and variations on that theme of animation and video of 3D models that are possible. I guess that's part of what's next, hopefully.
Yeah, part of what we were looking for in this project is to find items that were relatively lower bar, if you like. We're not interested in pushing the edges of the discipline because that would be research and development. But we are interested in finding items that are maybe easier to produce, but aren't being produced for some reason, and then to look at their applications within the classroom. So it's interesting because we're taking some relatively simple technology. Photogrammetry is not at the very, very edges of the discipline, but yet even Michael was telling me the other day, he's surprised at how little it's applied yet in our courses, and yet how valuable a tool it is.
Yeah, it's a really interesting process. As with any new technology, people have a hard time imagining it, but once they see it and interact with it, they think of all kinds of applications, which is what's been happening with the faculty at UBC. As they've seen and interacted, they've had ideas we never would have dreamed up how to use it.
I don't know if any of our other participants have questions. I know a few of you might be moving along because it's 5 minutes to the hour. Thank you all again for coming. Thank you so much to Andrew and to Mike Suchanek for joining us today. And thank you all very, very much for the hard work that you guys have done on the project, because it's been really, really, it's been a huge contribution to our students and to the excitement.
I too want to pipe in and thank everyone for their participation in our fabulous panel of speakers. And I encourage everyone to go back to the site and check out what is next on your schedule.